Lewell-Buck, welcome to Acting Prime Minister.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on. I wasn't sure whether anyone would be around this week as you've all been prorogued and sent off and then suddenly you might not be.
Well, as you know, yesterday we launched MPs for a Deal, so I was around for that, and then I've been doing some interviews about that this morning, and I'm heading back up to the constituency this afternoon. But for how long, who knows?
You might be called back. I mean, it's absolutely crazy times in the courts. It's all going to go to the court next week, and then, I don't know what's going to happen with conferences or anything, but...
I mean, to be honest, members of Parliament, I find it hard to keep up, so I can't imagine what members of the public are thinking. You know, every time they turn the telly on or every time they go on Twitter or social media, it's just a movable feast every few minutes. It's quite draining.
Yeah. Well, look, never mind being an MP. We're going to promote you today to be Prime Minister.
Lovely. Let's hope it's prophetic.
So you go through that Downing Street door, and just some fun questions to start with, just to get a sense of how you might settle into Downing Street. So you're unpacking your bags, and you're there in the study. What do you think is the picture that you'd take with you to hang on the wall?
I think anyone who knows me would know this hands down would be Gran Lewell. She is like my absolute hero. I absolutely adored her. Every speech I've ever made about, elderly care or about strong women, Gran Lewell is the main feature of it. She staged a sit-in at Jarrah Town Hall to get me mum and dad the house they've got now.
Wow.
She was so lovable and so kind, but also had a real sense of right and wrong and what was justice. And she always stood up for anybody who was, getting a raw deal.
And is that how you try and go about your politics?
Yeah, and I always hope that I'm doing her proud, because she never got to see me become a local councillor or become a member of Parliament, and I think both those things would have made her so proud. She would have been one of those, though, who was down the local shops bragging about it every 5 minutes.
So sadly you can't call your gran, but who would you be desperate to phone as soon as you got into Downing Street, do you think?
I think that would be my mum. Yeah, I'm really family focused. I've got a really tight-knit family, so it would be my mum, yeah.
And what do you think the drink is that you might pour yourself as you sit down at the desk and think, blimey, here I am in Downing Street?
I think I'd have a whiskey sour. I love whiskey sours,
Yeah.
so I think I'd have one of them. Yeah, I like things that you can really taste it. So, I like my alcohol to be strong. I like my food to have strong taste, and so yeah, whiskey sour.
Nice.
Yeah.
And let's talk a bit about your path to becoming Prime Minister,
Yeah.
because you were elected in South Shields in 2013 in a
That's right,
by-election after David Miliband stood down. And before that, you were a social worker and you worked in child protection, didn't you?
Yeah.
Which a lot of people would think has got to be one of the toughest jobs in Britain. And I'm just interested to know how that kind of affected your politics, really, the things you were seeing in your day-to-day job.
I mean, I think anyone growing up where I did, I'm from a family of shipyard workers, so, we've seen what happens when governments destroy communities and rip employment out of them, so that had already shaped my politics quite a lot. Going into social work, I think you see a different side of poverty and a different side of injustice, and there's also that angle to it where it's a really dangerous job. I had instances where I've had knives pulled against my throat, I've been tried to ripped out my car as I was driving, I've been punched in the face I don't know how many times, I've been, I've had police alarms in my house, gave evidence at court under armed guard with police, been held in a witness suite. So, all of those things toughen you up quite a lot. I was pretty tough anyway, I'm from the northeast and I'm working class. So, like most northeast women, I was pretty strong anyway.
Yeah. Going
Going into that job though really, really toughened you up. So there's very little I'm afraid of now. And I think with all the threats against MPs at the moment, and the police sometimes say to me that I'm perhaps not taking it as seriously. I am. It's business as usual for me, unfortunately, because in my old job I knew how to protect myself. I was used to liaising with the police, and I was used to being under threat. So for me, I am worried about it. And of course, what's happened historically with my lovely colleague, Jo, it does concern me, but I just think it's because I'm used to operating in that environment. But I never thought becoming a member of Parliament that I would be having to deal with stuff like that.
Yeah. And which job do you think is harder then, being a social worker or being an MP?
I think any job, if you do it right and you care about it, it's hard. I think any job in the world, I had 17 jobs before I became a member of Parliament.
What kind of things were you doing before?
I used to sell stuff out of a bag around pubs, dusters and all kinds of things, a bit like a Del Boy. I did that for a little while. I was a cleaner in the Metro Centre. I've worked in bars, pubs, call centres, literally anything, because for me, it was always about earning a living and getting money, and no job is lesser or more important than another one. It's just about having pride in it.
And I think you trained to be a social worker when you were in your late 20s, is that right?
I did, yeah.
And that was when, for the first time, you discovered you had dyspraxia.
Yes.
Yeah, because you were actually studying, and then that's when it sort of came to the fore, and I think it was a lecturer who helped you to understand that that's some of the problems you were going through were related to dyspraxia.
Yeah, well, one of my lecturers said, Emma, there's something not quite right with you. And I said, well, I know that. Everyone knows that. And she said, no, seriously, there's something that just doesn't kind of cut through in the work that you're doing. So they sent us to see an ed psych and asked all these questions and then did some tests with us. And the report came back saying you've got mild dyslexia and you've got dyspraxia. For me, I read the reports, gave it to my parents, friends and family, and they said, is that a condition? We thought it was just you, because I've always been a bit quirky. And I said, no, apparently it's a thing. And I put it on a shelf, forgot about it. And then when I became an MP, one of my researchers said, did I read somewhere you had this condition called dyspraxia? I went, yeah. And I went, oh, there's a foundation. There's like hundreds of people with this. Really? And so then I just got involved with them and became a bit of a spokesperson for them.
So for people who don't know what dyspraxia is, how does it affect you day to day, and how in particular does it affect your job as an MP?
I think the best way to describe it, because it is difficult to describe it, I would say it's that our brain's wired a bit differently.
Okay.
So see the world differently, see things differently. You know, I'd never be sat around the table with a bunch of people agreeing with them all. I'm always thinking outside the box. So I think dyspraxics make great politicians, because in an age where everyone is kind of, you know, going with the flow sometimes in political circles.
The party line or whatever.
It's dyspraxics are great for that. So and also I think that coordination as well. Sometimes, so I'll often, you know, kind of dunch into people or drop things, or so just that kind of thing. It's a bit weird to describe. It's a developmental coordination disorder, is how its official title is.
And what was that like growing up? Because you didn't know when you were a kid what it was that was making you a little bit clumsy or a bit uncoordinated. What were some of the things that you had to go through as a kid? I
think it was just frustrating, and obviously when you're a kid in school, you don't want to stand out, do you? You want to be kind of accepted, and it was very hard sometimes to know that I was different but not know why. And I think in the end, people, you know, my friendship groups coalesced around us because they could see I was a bit different and they thought I was quite amusing and a bit quirky. So, you know, I was one of the lucky ones, but for some people, they don't develop that kind of friendship group and they can be very isolated. But also I think it affects your self-esteem and confidence because you don't know. So you're always wondering, especially when you're a teenage girl, you know, you're always thinking, why am I so different? Why can I not do like something like, why can I not put my makeup on properly? Or, you know, just little things. And every bit of work, like homework that I had to do, always took me longer than everyone else. Yeah, I knew I wasn't stupid. It just took that extra effort all the time and it's a bit more draining.
And there were some difficult times, I think, you've spoken about quite openly. There were times as a kid when you felt quite vulnerable and isolated about your dyspraxia, even though then you didn't know it was dyspraxia.
Yeah, well, it affects your self-esteem and confidence, doesn't it? If you're sitting and thinking, I know there's something really different about me, I know I'm thinking really differently to everyone else, you start to panic and think, is there something wrong with me? Now I know there was nothing wrong with us, and that, you know, I'm part of this, you know, amazing cohort of people who have dyspraxia who achieve great things in their lives. So I don't mind.
What kind of things have you got any particular memories of things when you were a kid that were difficult?
I think the one was because I never used to like being the centre of attention. I was incredibly shy, believe it or not, considering I've ended up in a job where I talk for a living. So I remember doing the cycling proficiency. Did you do that?
I used to do that?
Yeah. And obviously my coordination is just horrendous. And I remember the whole class watching in the window, and I'm on the bike, and I literally drove through every single cone and then fell off the bike in a heap and cried. And I think that's the one that always sticks in my head. Or every single sports day was like torture for me.
Oh God, it's torture for me too. And dyspraxia.
I was always last, or I'd always fell over at like the starting hurdle.
You've got a reason. So at least you've got a reason. And I mean, just lastly on this topic, what do you think you would say to your younger self now that you've become an MP, you're established in your career, looking back at young Emma who was struggling with it, what do you think you'd say to her?
I think I'd just say just keep being you, because, you know, eventually you'll be happy with you and you'll do things with it.
Yeah. Okay, so then obviously we get to the South Shields by-election, which is actually when I first met you. I don't know
That's
whether you
right.
remember
I
my
do
first ever stories in politics.
Yeah. It was a bit of a whirlwind for me, that. I had a bit of a rabbit in the headlights look most days.
And also, you know, difficult for you because David Miliband had just stepped down and he was a huge sort of national figure, wasn't he? And lots of people.
He was a star, wasn't he?
Yeah, not that you're not, but at that point, everyone was asking, weren't they? You know, I remember asking you, you know, what do you think, you know, how do you think you compare to David Miliband? And that must have been a lot. What was that like, becoming an MP and stepping into those shoes?
I think it was daunting, but just before it as well, my uncle had passed away, And I was incredibly close to my uncle, and I was in the hospice with him holding his hand. And he said, "Oh, Emma, you've got to go for MP. It's been your dream, you know, ever since you were a little kid. You're always that weird one watching the news and interested in politics." And I said, "No, I can't." I said, "There'll be really impressive people going for it. The party's probably got someone in mind." And he said, "I'll never forgive you if you don't, and you'll regret it." So I went for it. So I was quite emotional as well, because obviously I'd lost someone who I was incredibly close to and loved to bits, and then going through this process. But it was just so weird. It almost, to me, it felt like, you know, when people are on X Factor and stuff, and their life is taken over by a machine of like PR people, and that's what it felt like. I thought, this is what it must feel like. You know, you're plucked from obscurity, and then every time you open your front door, there's people around you, and then you've got people saying, you know, say this, dress like this, do that. Yeah. Really intense.
Must
really,
be quite
really
hard
intense.
to hold on to yourself in those moments, you know, actually stay true to who you are when people are saying, take this line, wear these clothes. And
well, you know what I did? I thought, these people are trained to win. I'll go with them because I want to keep the seat for my party in South Shields, and I want to be an MP. So just get your head down, ride through it.
Yeah, and you had a big challenge from UKIP at the time, and all sorts of things were going on. It was slightly different politics.
Yeah.
It feels like a million years ago. I can't believe
It
it was
does,
6 years ago.
yeah.
Anyway, look, you're Prime Minister now, so we
am.
should get back to that. And you can put anyone you want in your cabinet.
Yeah.
Who would you love to put in the cabinet? Just a couple of names.
I'd love Ellen Wilkinson in there. I'd love George Lansbury, Barbara Castle, and if possible, Margaret Thatcher, so I could curb her and stop her doing all the crappy things she did to my community. Because if she was in my cabinet, she'd have to behave, wouldn't she? So I think I'd have her.
That is an interesting idea, actually. Bring her back. Maybe you'd have to go back in time, though. You'd have to, you'd have to be Prime Minister.
Go back in time,
in 1979,
Bring her in and say, no, you're not shutting those minds, so you're not shutting those shitty hearts. You know, control her a bit.
Okay, interesting idea. And then, obviously, as Prime Minister, you'd also have the small matter of Brexit to deal with.
Yeah.
And this is interesting for you because obviously you've got a seat that voted overwhelmingly for Brexit, and the Labour Party at the moment is having a bit of a wrangle with its policy on Brexit, and it keeps inching ever towards a Remain position. Really, I suppose it's fair to say. And you've got a novel idea, which is to compromise.
Yes.
Which is not.
Yeah. Can people
a
remember
word,
that?
Yeah. I haven't used that word in a long time in political journalism. But just explain what is your position on Brexit? What is it that you think Parliament should be doing?
I mean, I've joined a group, as you know, called MPs for a Deal. And what we're trying to do is bring back, not bring it back, actually put it into the open, the consensus deal that was reached between Theresa May and the Labour front bench that ticked all the boxes of what Labour was saying they wanted. I was absolutely dismayed when there was an opportunity for us to debate that and vote on it in Parliament, and it was completely quashed by those intent on wanting to remain and those intent on leaving with no deal. There was a real opportunity there. If we'd grasped that, we could now be looking at that, amending it, or we might have even left the EU by now.
So you want to essentially get a deal.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to go through with no deal if it came to that?
Yeah, I mean, I've said that all along because my other fear is that our democracy is in free fall and it is crumbling. You know, we have a representative democracy. When that democracy and those people in that representative democracy, MPs, stop listening to the people who put them where they are, then that ceases to exist as a representative democracy. And you're paving the way for extremists and populists to take control. And I'm really scared about where our country's heading if we don't deliver on the result of the referendum. That's why I'm saying this is our last-ditch attempt now. Let's get a deal through. And, you know, there's a lot of people being disingenuous and saying that we're asking for Theresa May's deal to come back. We are not. We are asking for the deal negotiated between the Labour front bench and Theresa May's government to come back so we can look at it, potentially amend it and move forward.
I mean, a lot of colleagues in your party would be, and they are, astounded by the fact that you could even go through with no deal. They think that would put jobs at risk, and it goes against everything Labour stands for in terms of protecting people's livelihoods, protecting people's workers' rights. Are you not worried that, I hear what you're saying about not wanting, not wanting to betray the voters, but are you not worried that maybe you'll make your constituents' lives worse with no deal?
I mean, all of this is hypothetical, isn't it? Because no one actually knows, no one has a crystal ball, and no one really knows what's going to come from each different permutation of this debate. But all I know is that I meet regularly with businesses in my constituency, and a lot of them now are saying to me that this increased uncertainty, this not knowing where we are heading, is what is killing their business. And this is businesses large and small. And if their business is struggling, then my constituents start to lose their jobs. We need an end to this now, and we need to be moving forward instead of this constant just going round and round in circles.
Do you kind of wish that maybe you just voted for Theresa May's deal back at the start of the year and that your Labour colleagues had too, and then this thing would just be done?
Not really, because, you know, at the end of the day, I was holding out for something better, and I think that's what we got to. Before we voted, you know, meaningful vote 1, 2 and 3, I wasn't entirely satisfied with what was being offered. By the time we got to the end of those cross-party talks, I was happy with what was being offered. That looked, to all intents and purposes, because nobody's seen it, that looked like a good compromise and a good deal and something I could work with, and I was willing to vote for that, and I think a hell of a lot of MPs were. But as usual, those who'd never seen it, never read it properly, on their feet shouting it down before they'd even got a chance to consider it properly. And that, to me, has been the biggest failure of this Parliament. Labour's
Deputy Leader, Tom Watson, has said this morning that there is no such thing as a good Brexit deal. What do you make of that?
I mean, this is difficult because, you know, I don't want to say anything against a colleague, but I just think Tom's intervention this morning was unhelpful. What it does is it alienates members of Parliament like me who are trying to seek a deal and move forward with the result of the referendum that we promised people we would do. It also alienates a hell of a lot of Labour voters who voted Leave. And secondly, I think part of his speech was about pushing for a second referendum. There isn't the numbers in Parliament for that. He's saying let's have a second referendum before a general election. There's not the numbers there, so it's also a bit of an unnecessary thing to say.
I mean, his argument essentially is that the best thing for Labour voters is to stay in the EU, and he thinks that it's your job as Labour MPs to be honest with Labour voters and to say, look guys, effectively you were wrong, and that we shouldn't go through with Brexit. What do you think of that?
I think when MPs start taking a stance of telling their constituents, we'll give you a vote and we'll adhere to it, and then saying them, actually, you know what, we're cleverer than you, we know more than you, and we're just going to stick 2 fingers up to your votes. I think that's a dangerous path to travel, and it goes back to the debate we were having earlier around what happens in a representative democracy when those who promise something don't deliver on it, and that worries me. And again, I think we could be heading into a time where we end up with some kind of Trump figure in number 10 or even worse.
What about this idea that maybe a referendum would be one way out, because at least people could be asked again and they get another chance to say whether they definitely want to go through with Brexit? What do you think of that idea?
Well, people have already spoken, and you know, after the referendum we had a general election, and 80% of MPs, I think it's 80% of MPs in the House had in their manifesto, we will respect the result of the referendum. And that referendum was really nasty, really divisive, and unleashed a tinderbox of xenophobic hate that I have never seen in my lifetime. I can't think for 1 second that rerunning it, it's going to be calmer, it is going to be worse.
Do you think part of the problem then is that maybe so much policy is made down here in London, where obviously there was a big Remain vote, a lot of MPs spent a lot of their time in London, and that maybe Labour's lost sight of those heartlands in South Shields, where you're from, where people voted overwhelmingly for Leave?
I don't think Labour's lost sight. I mean, if you look at what Jeremy Corbyn's doing, he's been trying to respect both Leavers and Remainers throughout all of this. I think the problem is that when you have a middle ground position, it confuses people, no matter how good that position is. And voters tend to respond, in my experience, to people who have a really clear position one way or the other and a really clear line.
Okay, well look, let's go away from Brexit, because that's not everything that you want to do as Prime Minister, and maybe by the time you're Prime Minister, Brexit might be sorted, who knows? So what other law would you love to pass, do you think, if you could pass any law?
It's a tricky one, but obviously I've done a lot of work around hunger. I set up a charity called Feeding Britain, so I would want to make sure that nobody in this country had to deal with the shame of going without food or have to be hungry.
So, and you also pushed really hard this year to actually get a proper measure of food insecurity, didn't you? How many people go hungry in Britain? Because unlike other countries, we don't measure it here, and you did manage to have some success with that.
I did, yeah, and it's about, if you want to mitigate a problem in your country, then you need to measure it, because you need to know exactly where that problem is and how many people are struggling. I think hunger and food banks have been used as a political football for such a long time in this country, and what I'm saying is take the heat out of that and let's actually look at it properly. Let's use a data set approved by the ONS, and let's use tried and tested questions that they use in other countries like Canada and the USA. And thankfully, eventually, the government conceded and agreed it's the right thing to do. So we should have the first results coming out, I think, in 2021.
Because that would be the first sort of independent measure of hunger, wouldn't it? Because it has been incredibly criticised. I remember the government a couple of years ago saying that the reason for the rise in food bank usage was because they were better advertised. And then actually Amber Rudd, when she was in DWP, she apologised for that and said, no, that wasn't true. I mean, what do you think has led to the rise in food bank usage?
I mean, I've been really clear from the outset. It's this government's policies, it's the welfare reform, it's their inaction on low-paid and insecure work, it's, you know, the inability to address things like the gig economy, and, you know, ultimately it is at their door, this problem. And I know from charities and faith groups and from independent studies that have been done that the figures are very high, and the government just continually buried their heads in the sand and refused to acknowledge it. And for me, you know, we are one of the richest countries in the world. The UN said there's up to 8 million people in this country food insecure, and the government dismissed them and continued with their damaging welfare reform, punitive sanctions, and inaction on low-pay insecure work. That is unforgivable. People are starving on their watch. So I'm pleased that this measurement's in place, but that measurement should not be an excuse for inaction either.
Okay, so first law passed, no more hunger in the UK. And your time in Downing Street is already coming to an end.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
I know it flies by, right?
Yeah.
So if you...
As it does for everyone recently.
That's true, actually. Who knows how long Boris Johnson's time in Downing Street will be. But a few quick fire questions just before you walk back out that number 10 door. Firstly, if you have to go into coalition with somebody, who would you rather go into coalition with, the Brexit Party or the Lib Dems? These are intentionally tricky, by the way.
I would be vilified for this, but the Brexit Party.
Would you?
Yeah.
You think
even though I despise everything they stand for, I could not go into league with a party who want to revoke Article 50.
So purely for the reason that you would at least be seeing through Brexit.
It made me feel sick saying that, but literally that, looking at it, Okay.
Yeah. Who would you rather have dinner with, Tony Blair or Gordon Brown?
Oh, Gordon. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've always had a lot of respect for Gordon.
Do you see your politics as closer to Gordon Brown than Tony Blair?
Not necessarily. I mean, I have respect for Tony Blair as well, but I've just always had a bit of a soft spot for Gordon.
Okay, where's the first country you'd love to visit as Prime Minister?
First country? Oh, these are tricky, aren't they? I've got the whole world, haven't I?
You've got the whole world.
Australia.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Australia.
Yeah. Any particular reason, just because you fancy visiting it, or you think we need to
I've never been, I fancy visiting it, but also I think there's some similarities between, you know, the politics there and perhaps my politics.
Okay, okay, interesting. And then what would be the song you'd love to dance to at a party conference? Often you come onto stage to a song, or maybe it's in a late night party. What's your go-to song?
Oh, that's a hard one as well, because my music taste isn't really stuff that you would dance to.
What is your music taste?
I love Bob Dylan, that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I think probably, you know what, this is really embarrassing, but it always gets you on the dance floor, Summit by the Spice Girls. That always does the job, doesn't it?
That's not embarrassing, they're back in now. they're having their second win now. And lastly, Emma, would you ever want to be Prime Minister, do you think?
I don't think so.
No?
No, I don't think so. It's not for the likes of me. I think our country's a long way from having a Prime Minister with an accent like mine and a background like mine.
Do you think so? You really think that rules you out?
I do, yeah. I mean, I've spent my whole life going for jobs where I got dismissed because of my accent and because of my background. I've been laughed at before in interviews, so I think our country, as it is, has a long way to go before we do that.
It's such a shame that would hold you back. You're not
I mean, it didn't hold me back because I kept going, and you know, I called them out at those interviews, and I said, "How dare you? You know, this is bang out of order," and you know, it helped form my politics. But ultimately, I just think, no, I don't think we're there yet, which makes me really sad. Yeah. But hopefully, the more people like me who come into Parliament with accents and you know, who are from my class, then maybe one day we'll get there. But I don't think so in my lifetime.
Well, look, let's hope that you're wrong.
Yes.
About that. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you very much.
And I hope you get some kind of certainty about what you're doing for the next few weeks.
Who knows?
Thanks very much.
Thank you.